I never thought I would live to see the day when my own son would tell me I wasn't welcome at his Christmas table. I'm not talking about some casual dinner or a misunderstanding over who brings the dessert. No, I mean Christmas, the one day a year when families are supposed to gather, no matter how rough the year has been. For me, Christmas had always been about togetherness, about holding on to each other when the world felt cold. And yet, on that frosty December evening, I found myself sitting in my recliner with the phone pressed to my ear, hearing words I never imagined would come from my boy. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. "Dad," David said, his voice tight, hesitant. I could almost picture him on the other end, rubbing the back of his neck the way he did when he was nervous. "Monica thinks it's better if you don't come this year." thepastoffind.com. The past of find. At first, I thought I had misheard him. The line had a little static. My hearing isn't what it used to be either. I leaned forward, my knuckles whitening around the armrest. "What did you say, son?" There was a long silence. I could hear him breathing. He wasn't a smoker, but the breath sounded strained, shallow, like he was bracing himself. "It's just, things are complicated," he muttered. "Monica's family feels they'd be more comfortable if it was just us this year. Her parents, her cousins, you know, a smaller circle." Smaller circle. That's how he put it. And I was outside of it. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "David, I've been there every Christmas since you bought that house. I remember hauling in your first tree, the 7-foot spruce from the lot by the old firehouse. You didn't even have a saw sharp enough to cut the trunk. I was on my knees in the cold with my old handsaw, making it fit the stand. Azer, in the usfeining froze, in moors, in variers." "I know, Dad," he said quickly, almost defensive. "I haven't forgotten, but this year is just different." Different. That word landed heavy, like a door closing. I looked around my living room as if for proof that I still belonged somewhere. The walls were bare. I hadn't put up decorations in years. Why would I? Ever since David married Monica, Christmas moved to their house. My place became just the stopover, the spot where gifts were hidden until the grandkids were old enough to peek under trees. But my house wasn't where the stockings hung anymore. It wasn't where the laughter echoed or where the smell of roasted ham filled the air. That was all at their place now. And their place, as it happened, was the very house I had helped them buy. "Son," I said quietly, forcing the words out, "you're telling me I can't sit at my own table for Christmas?" "It's not like that," he rushed to explain. "It's Monica's parents. Dad, you know how they are. They feel awkward." Awkward. That was the word. My existence made them uncomfortable. "Awkward," I repeated, almost to myself. "After all I've done, I'm awkward." "Please, Dad," David pleaded. "Don't make this harder. Try to understand. We'll make it up another time." Another time. Like Christmas was a dentist appointment we could reschedule. I didn't trust myself to speak further. My chest felt tight, the kind of ache you don't tell your doctor about because you don't want him fussing with more pills. So I simply hung up the phone. I set it down on the table beside my coffee mug, which had gone lukewarm. The silence in the house grew thick, pressing against my ears. I sat back, staring at the blank wall where I used to hang stockings when David was a boy. I remembered how he'd bounce out of bed at dawn, rushing to see what Santa brought. His mother, God rest her soul, would laugh and scold him for waking us too early. Back then, Christmas was magic, a reminder that love could fill a room brighter than any string of lights. But that night, love felt a million miles away. Outside, through the frosted window, I could see the glow of Christmas lights strung across the neighborhood. Inflatable reindeer bobbed in front yards. Children's voices carried on the wind, high-pitched and joyous, chasing each other through the snow. The world out there was merry and bright, just like the carol says. Inside, it was just me and the steady hum of the furnace, rattling to keep the cold at bay. The sound filled the emptiness, but it didn't warm me. Not really. I got up and wandered through my house. My knees protested with every step, stiff from years of labor. I passed the hallway lined with old photographs. There was David, in his Little League uniform, grinning with a missing tooth. There he was in his cap and gown, shaking hands with the principal. And there he was on his wedding day, standing tall beside Monica, her smile bright and sharp. I remembered paying for that suit he wore, remembered giving them the down payment for their home. After that phone call with David, I sat in my living room for what felt like hours, staring into the shadows on the walls. The next morning, though, I couldn't shake the ache in my chest. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, bitter and strong, and sat at the kitchen table with the stack of envelopes I'd been ignoring. The mortgage statements were still there, clean, crisp, with my name on the automatic transfer, the $2,800 that left my account each month without fail. I traced my finger down the numbers, my own handwriting on the forms from years back when we set it all up. That house wasn't just bricks and wood. It wasn't just a roof over David and Monica's heads. It was years of me bending my back when my body was telling me to stop, of swallowing pride to write checks when I wanted to use that money for a new truck or a trip I never took. I thought about the day David and Monica first walked into that house. The walls were dingy, paint peeling like sunburned skin. The yard was nothing but dirt patches and weeds. Monica wrinkled her nose, muttering that it looked cheap. I remember setting my jaw, telling her it had good bones, that with some sweat and elbow grease it could shine. She gave me a look I'll never forget, half a smile, half a sneer. "You would say that, Arthur. Blue-collar men always think they can fix everything with a hammer." Blue-collar. She said it like a curse, like it was less than. I carried that word with me as I patched that roof in the blazing sun, sweat stinging my eyes, shingles cutting into my palms. I carried it when I hauled cabinets from Home Depot, measuring and cutting until my knuckles were raw. I carried it every time I stood in line at Lowe's with lumber stacked on a cart, the young cashier calling me sir with that polite distance reserved for old men who look like they've spent too long in work boots. Still, I did it, because it was for David, for his kids, for a future I thought we were building together. One evening, not long after they moved in, I remember Monica hosting a dinner. Her parents came over, dressed neat, talking about country clubs and vacations to Florida. They sipped wine like it was water, and when I walked in, still in my work jacket from fixing the porch rail, Monica's mother gave me that tight smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. I sat at the table anyway, listening as they talked about keeping up appearances and how lucky David was to have married into their family. I swallowed the sting of those words, pushing my fork through a pile of mashed potatoes, reminding myself that family means compromise. But over time, the comments stacked up. Monica teasing about my old pickup truck, her father bragging about investments, slipping in a jab about people who never learned how to make money work for them. Even David sometimes laughing a little too quickly at their jokes, though he wouldn't meet my eyes when he did. And yet, through all of that, I kept paying $2,800, month after month. Sometimes, late at night, I would drive past their house. I'd slow down just enough to see the lights on, the silhouettes moving behind the curtains. I'd think about the Christmas lights I'd strung along that very roof, the weekends I spent sanding floors, painting trim, fixing leaks. My fingerprints were in every corner of that place, even if they didn't see it. The phone rang late in the afternoon, when the winter sun was already sinking behind the rooftops and casting long blue shadows across my living room. I knew the number before I even picked it up. Monica's voice came through sharp and polished, the kind of voice that had always carried a certain distance, as though she were talking down from a step above me. "Arthur," she began, skipping over any pleasantries. "My parents are flying in this week. Their plane lands Friday evening. I need you to pick them up from the airport." For a moment, I didn't answer. I sat there with the receiver pressed to my ear, staring at the pattern in the carpet, my pulse drumming in my temples. Finally, I said, "Why me?" She exhaled, a small laugh tucked into her words. "Well, you're free, aren't you? It's not as if you have much going on, and it would mean a lot to them if you showed some respect." Free, respect. Two words that landed like darts. I thought about all the times I had driven across town with their groceries, the times I had pulled weeds in their yard, painted their trim, carried heavy boxes up their stairs while they stood watching. "Respect," she said, as if the last 5 years had been anything but. I closed my eyes, hearing her voice drone on, explaining the arrival gate, the baggage claim, even reminding me to bring a sign with their last name written on it. As if I were their hired driver. I hung up the phone, just like that. No word of agreement, no argument, just the click of finality. The silence afterward was deafening. I sat there for a long while, the weight of it pressing down, until I finally stood and walked toward the stack of papers that had been haunting me for days. Mortgage statements, bank transfers, every slip of proof that I had been carrying the load of their life. I pulled them into a pile on the table. My hands trembled as I touched the papers, not from weakness, but from something rising inside me, an anger that had been simmering, quiet, pushed down every time I told myself I was doing it for David, for the kids, for family. I reached for the lighter I kept in the drawer, the one I used for candles and old photographs. I struck the flame, the tiny flicker dancing in the dim room, and touched it to the corner of the top sheet. At first it was small, a whisper of smoke curling upward. Then it caught, orange licking across the paper, edges curling black. The heat rose, the smell sharp, acrid. I watched as one statement after another turned to ash, the numbers dissolving into nothing. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about something deeper. Dignity. For 5 years I had let them take piece after piece of me, my labor, my savings, my pride, because I believed family was worth any cost. But as the papers crumbled to ash, I realized there comes a point where giving becomes erasure, where sacrifice turns into self-betrayal. I wasn't going to be their errand boy anymore. The flames hissed low as the last sheet collapsed into itself, a pile of gray and black. I stood there, the room quiet except for the hum of the furnace, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a hard edge of resolve. That night, I slept with a kind of clarity I hadn't known in years. No tossing, no staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd done enough. I had drawn a line. In the morning, when I walked out onto my porch, the cold air bit at my face. The neighborhood was alive with holiday cheer neighbors stringing more lights, kids sliding down icy driveways, carolers practicing down the block. But I stood there with my breath puffing out in clouds, knowing my season would not be one of joy this year. The morning started like any other. I made myself a cup of coffee, opened the blinds to let in the pale winter light, and settled into my chair with the paper. But when I unfolded the local section, the headline nearly made me spill the coffee across my lap. Local man leaves elderly out in the storm. My eyes locked on the bold letters. The article beneath painted a picture of me that was unrecognizable, a man who had supposedly abandoned his family during the worst blizzard we'd had in years. It spoke of an aging father-in-law left to fend for himself, of cruelty and neglect. Only, the story wasn't about me being the victim. It was about me being the villain. My name was right there in print, Arthur, as if I were some heartless old man who had turned his back on those who needed him most. I read the lines twice, then 3 times, my pulse rising with every word. The details twisted the truth into something grotesque. It suggested I had refused to open my door to Monica's parents during the storm, that I had callously let them suffer because of some petty family grudge. It painted them as frail, innocent souls, stranded in the cold, while I sat warm and comfortable. It was a lie, a calculated, vicious lie. I folded the paper slowly, my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from fury. I knew exactly whose fingerprints were on that article. Richard, Monica's father. He'd always had friends in the right places, Rotary Club, the Chamber of Commerce, even a few at the local paper. He'd spun the story to cast himself and his family as victims, and me as the villain. Later that morning, I walked down to the diner on Main Street, needing something greasy to steady myself. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in, and the smell of bacon and fried eggs wrapped around me. Same old crowd, truckers, retirees, young moms with toddlers in booster seats. But I felt the eyes before I even slid into a booth. "Morning, Arthur," the waitress said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She poured me coffee, but her hands hesitated, the pot clinking softly against the rim of the cup. At the table by the window, 2 old-timers whispered behind their hands. A young couple at the counter glanced my way, then back at each other. I caught words in the low murmur: storm, shame, cruel. The article had done its job. My reputation was stained in a town where gossip traveled faster than weather. I stirred sugar into my coffee, staring at the dark swirl, and thought, they want me humiliated. They want me shamed into silence. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. That evening, back at my house, I pulled out boxes from the hall closet. Years of receipts, statements, records. I lined them up on the kitchen table, one after another. The bank statements first. Every single month, $2,800, leaving my account and heading straight to theirs. Mortgage payments that kept their roof over their heads. Then the repair receipts: new shingles, plumbing supplies, paint, every nail and screw accounted for. I even dug up old photographs. Monica smiling in her kitchen, brand new cabinets behind her. Monica posing in front of the stainless steel refrigerator she bragged about online, bought with money I had fronted. On her Facebook page she'd posted, "Finally a kitchen worthy of entertaining." No mention of who had paid for it. I stacked it all carefully. Evidence, proof, the truth they thought they could bury under lies. The phone rang while I was at it. I answered, though I already knew the voice. "Dad, what are you doing?" David's tone was sharp, almost panicked. "You're stirring things up. Monica is furious. She says you're making us look bad." This plays, one of the 2-2 plays, and one of the 2-2. I held the receiver, listening, but didn't reply right away. I wanted him to hear the weight of my silence. "Please," he went on, "just let it go. You don't understand the pressure she's under. Her family, this is serious." Finally, I spoke, calm but steady. "It's serious for me too, David. You let them drag my name through the mud. You stood by while they made me a monster in my own town." There was a pause. Then the line clicked dead. He'd hung up on me. Not long after, an email came through. From Monica. Short, sharp, dripping with contempt. "Arthur, if you don't stop this nonsense, you'll regret it. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I read it once, then closed the laptop. Threats, lies, humiliation. They thought they could corner me into surrender. But as I sat there, looking at the piles of statements and photographs spread across my table, I felt the anger harden into something else. Resolve. I wasn't backing down. Not this time. Sunday mornings had always carried a rhythm of their own in my life. For decades, I had risen early, dressed in my best flannel or pressed shirt, and made my way down Maple Avenue to the white-steepled church that stood like a sentinel in the heart of town. That morning was no different in ritual, but the air felt weighted. Whispers of my name had grown louder with each passing day, and I knew stepping into that sanctuary would feel less like coming home and more like walking into a trial. As I pulled into the gravel lot, I could already see familiar faces turning. Heads tilted, conversations paused. The lot was packed pickup trucks, minivans, a few sedans polished to a shine. Every Sunday had its crowd, but this morning, the air buzzed differently. A mix of curiosity, pity, and judgment drifted across the lot like smoke. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors, and the smell of old hymnals, floor wax, and coffee greeted me. The sanctuary glowed with morning sunlight pouring through stained glass. The choir hummed their warm-up at the front, and parishioners shuffled into pews, clasping their bulletins. "Arthur, Mrs." Delaney murmured as I passed, her voice hushed, but her eyes scanning me like I was both a wounded soldier and a suspect at once. I nodded, keeping my stride steady, and slid into the same third pew from the back where I'd sat for 30 years. The sermon began, and Reverend Jacob stood at the pulpit, his Bible open, his glasses perched low on his nose. He was a man I respected, a man who'd baptized David when he was just a baby. His voice carried that calm authority that could either comfort or cut. He began with a passage about forgiveness, about letting go of bitterness, about the weight anger places on the soul. I knew he wasn't naming me, but he didn't have to. Every glance from the congregation told me I was the unspoken subject. After the benediction, as folks rose, Reverend Jacobs made his way toward me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. "Arthur," he said, voice lowered so others couldn't hear. "Sometimes the hardest thing a man can do is forgive. It frees not only them, but you too." I looked him in the eye. My voice came out steady, low, but every word deliberate. Reverend, forgiveness doesn't mean letting them rob me blind. It doesn't mean closing my eyes while they rewrite the truth. He sighed, gave my shoulder a squeeze, and stepped aside. It was clear he wished for peace, but he hadn't walked my road. He hadn't sat alone in that house at night with bills piled high, the echoes of betrayal louder than any hymn. Downstairs in the fellowship hall, the potluck spread filled long folding tables, casseroles, deviled eggs, crock-pots simmering with chili, baskets of rolls. The scent of comfort food wafted through the room, but under it ran the current of whispers. I stood with a paper plate in hand, listening without meaning to. "Shame what happened, Mrs." Parker whispered to a friend near the dessert table. "I always thought Arthur was such a devoted father, but you never know." Across the room, old Tom Reeves, who'd worked construction with me years ago, raised his voice just enough for people to hear. The man kept a roof over their heads for years. Folks ought to remember that before passing judgment. "That's leavened of the forder. It was one Tuig." Two camps had formed, those who believed the smear and those who remembered the sweat on my brow, the hammer in my hand, the steady checks mailed month after month. The room hummed with division, my name tossed around like a ball no one wanted to hold on to for long. As I spooned macaroni salad onto my plate, a younger man I barely knew leaned in and said, "Arthur, people talk, but truth's a stubborn thing. It'll come out." "Every day." I nodded, gave him a quiet thank you, and moved toward a corner table. Sitting there, I felt every eye, every murmur, every judgment. I wasn't just Arthur anymore. I was a headline, a story, a lesson. Some pitied me, others condemned me, and a few, just a few, still saw me as the man I always had been. That morning at church, I realized something chilling and clarifying all at once. It wasn't just family now. It wasn't just private. The whole town had split itself into sides, and I was no longer invisible. I was the center of their debate. And if they wanted to make me the center, then I would show them the truth, loud enough so even the stained glass couldn't muffle it. The night I chose to walk into their Christmas gathering, I knew it wasn't going to be another ordinary holiday. The air had that sharp December bite as I drove slowly down their street, the houses glowing with colored lights, inflatable Santas wobbling in the yards, and the sound of children laughing faintly, carrying through the cold night air. Each front porch looked like something out of a Hallmark card, and yet I felt none of that warmth. When I parked at the curb, I could already hear the hum of conversation from their house laughter, clinking glasses, the kind of cheer that should have belonged to Family United, but it wasn't my family anymore. Not in the way it used to be. I opened my trunk, reached in, and carefully lifted out the old leather satchel I had prepared for weeks. Inside, neatly arranged, were 12 manila folders, each labeled, each stuffed with copies of bank statements, mortgage records, repair bills, and printouts of Monica's showy social media posts. Evidence. The kind of truth no rumor could bury. I stood there for a long moment on their walkway, the sound of silent night leaking from the speakers inside, and I thought about all the years I had walked into homes like this, with arms full of gifts, not grievances. But tonight, I wasn't there to give. Tonight, I was there to take something back. When I pushed open the front door, the room froze for a second. Their living room was decorated like a spread from Better Homes and Gardens garland twined across the banister, stockings embroidered with names hung in perfect order, a 12-foot tree in the corner loaded with glass ornaments and white lights. Guests filled the space, drinks in hand, cheeks flushed from holiday cheer. And in the center of it all stood David and Monica, hosting with wide smiles, until they saw me. The noise faltered, laughter thinning into a nervous quiet. Monica's smile snapped into a stiff line. David's jaw tightened. "Dad?" David finally said, stepping forward. His voice was low, controlled, but I caught the flicker of panic in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I placed the satchel on the coffee table, unbuckled it, and began pulling out the folders one by one. 12 in total. I laid them down in a slow, deliberate rhythm, the flap of each folder hitting wood echoing louder than the Christmas carols still playing softly in the background. "I came to bring a gift," I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled slightly. The truth. The guests shifted uneasily. Some leaned closer. Others glanced at each other, whispers rippling at the edges of the room. "This," I began, lifting the first folder, "is the mortgage. For 5 years I paid $2,800 a month. That's over $160,000 out of my pocket. And yet I was told I didn't belong here." I set it down and opened the second. "This is the bill from Home Depot when I fixed the roof after that storm. I climbed the ladder while my knees ached and my hands bled. Not David, not Monica, me." The third folder revealed stacks of credit card statements. "These," I said, "are Monica's purchases. Thousands spent on designer handbags, vacations, spa retreats, all while I was told to tighten my belt." Monica's face flushed crimson. She reached for David, hissing through clenched teeth, "Do something." But I wasn't done. I lifted the fourth folder, a printed copy of the newspaper article. "And this is the smear. The story about me being abandoned in the storm, written by Monica's father, Richard, who thought his connections could bury me alive. But lies don't age well. They wrinkle and rot like spoiled fruit." The room was silent now, completely silent. Even the children who had been playing by the tree had gone quiet, sensing the storm gathering in the air. One of the guests, a neighbor I recognized from down the block, muttered, "Good Lord." I pressed my palms flat on the table, leaned forward, and looked straight at David. "You made me the outsider in a house I kept standing. You let her mock me, call me blue collar like it was dirt on her shoes. And you stood there, saying nothing, while I was cut down day after day." David opened his mouth, but no words came out. His face was pale, lips twitching with some half-formed defense he couldn't manage to say out loud. I turned then, letting my eyes sweep over the room, making sure each guest looked me in the eye. I've carried their silence, their greed, their contempt long enough. Tonight, I'm done carrying it. "We shada Risa stad." I paused, the carols shifting into a brighter tune behind me, mocking the heaviness in the room. Then I said the words I had rehearsed, the ones I knew would settle like a stone in the pit of their stomachs. "From this day forward, not a single dollar more." The words cut the room in half. Guests exchanged stunned glances. Someone gasped. A woman near the tree set her drink down with a sharp clink. Monica's lips parted, trembling, but no sound came out. David looked like he had aged 10 years in a minute. And as the weight of what I said sank in, the laughter and cheer that had filled the house just moments ago evaporated completely, leaving behind only the crackle of the fireplace and the faint hum of lights on the tree. Then something shifted. One by one, the guests turned their backs to Monica. Conversations started again, but not with her. They whispered to each other, shaking their heads, eyes narrowing in her direction. In the space of a few minutes, the room that had been her stage became her cage. I didn't need to stay longer. I gathered my empty satchel, straightened my jacket, and walked back toward the door. No one stopped me. No one asked me to explain further. I had said what needed saying. As I stepped into the cold night air again, I heard the first voice behind me, an older neighbor, say quietly, "About time someone stood up." The door shut behind me, muffling the chaos I had left inside. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and clean. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like a man who had finally stepped back into his own name. The morning after Christmas felt like the air itself had shifted. The whole town seemed to know what had happened inside David and Monica's house, though I hadn't breathed a word beyond the people in that living room. News like that doesn't need a paper to spread. It moves faster through whispers at the grocery store, between hymns in church pews, or over coffee at the diner. By the next day, it was as if the whole community had been in that room, watching me drop those files onto the coffee table like bricks. Monica and David had built their reputation in this town on appearances. David was the successful son who had a family home and a career. Monica, the sharp-tongued wife who ran committees like a general. They had standing in the PTA, in the homeowners association, in church potlucks. They knew how to put on a show. But when the curtain dropped that Christmas night, no one was clapping. I sat in the back of the small diner the following morning, sipping burnt coffee and stirring it more than I drank it. Folks trickled in, bundled in coats, the bell above the door jingling. I didn't need to look up to know when the subject shifted. Heads tilted my way, voices lowered. Not cruel, not mocking, more like astonished. Some nodded at me as if to say, "About time." Someone spoke up. Others just looked down, uncomfortable, unsure how to balance sympathy with the awkwardness of it all. By the end of that week, word was that Monica had been quietly removed from the PTA board. Too many parents had lost confidence in her judgment. At the next HOA meeting, Richard, her father, the one who had pushed that smear piece into the local paper, sat stiffly, while neighbor after neighbor questioned his credibility. The article that once painted me as abandoned was now a stain on him. His word carried no weight anymore. And in a small town, that's like having your voice silenced in your own home. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't raise a glass, didn't grin. It wasn't triumph. I felt it was a hollow kind of release. Like air leaking from a balloon, steady and quiet, leaving you with something limp and weightless. One evening, a few days later, I took the old truck out on the county road, snow flurries drifting down and swirling in the headlights. The radio played Christmas songs on every station, cheerful choirs singing of peace on earth and joy to the world. My hands gripped the wheel while a part of me wanted to hum along. Another part wanted to scream. There was relief in having spoken the truth, but there was pain too, the kind that lingers like frostbite after the sting is gone. Family wasn't meant to end this way. 3 months slipped by like that, winter folding into early spring. Then the letter came, a plain white envelope from the bank, addressed to David and Monica, but delivered to my old P.O. box by mistake. Out of habit, maybe, they hadn't updated every account. Or maybe it was fate dropping it into my hands. The letter was short, but heavy with its threat. 3 mortgage payments past due, account in default, foreclosure proceedings imminent, if balance not remitted in full. I sat there in the post office parking lot, staring at those words until they blurred. I imagined Monica opening her copy at home, lips tightening, knuckles white on the edge of the counter. I pictured David slumped at the kitchen table, running a hand through his hair, trying to calculate numbers that didn't add up no matter how many times he punched them into a calculator. Neighbors talked. Word was Monica had been calling around, trying to borrow money. David had gone to old friends, to co-workers, to anyone who might spot him alone. No one bit. Their reservoir of goodwill had run dry. It was astonishing how quickly the invitation stopped, how the sympathy evaporated once people learned the truth. Folks might forgive pride, but not hypocrisy. One evening, I heard from an old friend that David had broken down during a conversation at the hardware store. He'd been standing there by the aisles of paint and nails, eyes red, voice low, saying he couldn't stop thinking about his mother, my late wife. How she had fought to hold that family together, how she'd believed in him even when he stumbled, and now he felt her absence like a shadow at his back, a reminder of what he'd lost, what he'd squandered. I didn't see him cry myself, but I believed it. That kind of guilt doesn't stay hidden forever. Meanwhile, the threat grew heavier. 3 months past due was enough to get the wolves circling. Another missed payment, and the bank would move. Foreclosure wasn't just a possibility anymore, it was breathing down their necks. And for the first time, I think they realized this wasn't a squabble that would fade with time. They were standing on the cliff's edge, and the ground was starting to crumble under their feet. I should have felt vindicated. Maybe part of me did. But late at night, alone in my small room, the thought of them losing everything didn't taste sweet. It tasted bitter, sharp, like old medicine that burned the throat. Still, I reminded myself they had chosen this. Every insult, every slight, every lie had paved the road they were now standing on. I hadn't pushed them to the cliff. They'd walked there themselves. The diner was nearly empty when David walked in. The kind of Tuesday morning when the truckers had already rolled out and the retirees had gone back home after their pancakes. The air smelled faintly of bacon grease and burnt coffee, the same way it had 30 years ago when I used to bring him here after Little League practice. He spotted me in the corner booth, the one with the cracked red vinyl seat. For a moment he froze in the doorway, like a boy who'd lost his way. His hair was messy, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He wasn't the man who once bragged about his promotions at the bank or the shiny SUV in his driveway. He looked stripped down, hollowed out. I didn't wave him over, just kept my hands wrapped around the chipped white mug in front of me. He slid into the booth across from me, his shoulders sagging under a weight I couldn't see but felt all the same. We didn't speak right away. The waitress came by, poured him coffee without asking. That's the thing about small towns. You don't have to say much for people to know what you need. David wrapped his fingers around the mug like it was the only thing keeping him steady. Finally, he looked up. His voice cracked. I let Monica's family control me. I let them erase you. And Mom. The words hung between us like smoke, filling the space with something that couldn't be brushed aside. My throat tightened, but I didn't rush to answer. I let the silence stretch until it became almost unbearable. For years I had prayed for this, for him to see, to admit, to stop hiding behind excuses. But when it finally came, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing over a field after the storm, knowing the crops had drowned long before the sun came back out. I stared at him, this grown man with gray at his temples, who had once sat across from me with sticky fingers from syrup-drenched pancakes. I saw the boy who asked me to teach him how to throw a curveball, the teenager who stomped out the door saying I didn't understand him, the man who turned his back when I needed him most. I forgive you, I said at last. My voice sounded steady, though inside it shook. But I won't save you. He flinched, as though I'd struck him. His lips parted, ready to protest, but no words came. He knew what I meant. Forgiveness was mine to give. Rescue was not. I leaned back, letting the words settle. You've lived your whole life thinking someone else would clean up the mess. Your mother did it. Monica did it, in her own way. Even I did, for too long. That's over now. His eyes brimmed. He tried to blink it away, but the tears slipped down his cheeks. In that moment, he looked more like my son than he had in years. Vulnerable, stripped of the armor he'd built. Dad, I don't know how to fix this, he whispered. Maybe you don't, I said. Maybe some things don't get fixed. Maybe you just live with the cracks. The jukebox in the corner started up, some old country song about loss and longing. It played soft, like it knew better than to intrude. David buried his face in his hands. I thought I was protecting us. I thought letting Monica's family take charge was the smart thing. But all I did was disappear. I let them erase you from our lives. I let them silence Mom's memory. I don't know how I became that man. I reached across the table, not to comfort, but to anchor. My hand rested on the table between us, not touching his. You became that man, one small choice at a time. And now, you face those choices. Every persisted perforant. He nodded, shoulders shaking. We sat there, father and son, in the faded diner that had seen us at our best and worst. The waitress refilled our cups, gave us a soft glance, and left us in our grief. As I looked at him, broken and confessing, I felt no triumph. Only a weary sense of justice like the earth itself had demanded balance. Forgiveness was a gift I could extend, but salvation was a task he had to earn himself. The house had been quiet too long, and I realized silence can weigh heavier than grief. When David and Monica fell out of my life, they left behind echoes that clung to the walls like mildew. I decided if I was going to keep breathing, I had to scrape those echoes away. So, I started with a paintbrush. The clapboard siding of my old place had peeled into a dull, tired gray, a skin shedding itself after too many seasons. I laid down a tarp, pulled on gloves, and started brushing white paint along the boards. Each stroke felt like pulling air into lungs that had forgotten how to expand. Neighbors slowed their cars to watch me, some lifting a hand, others shaking their heads as if unsure what to make of me after everything. I didn't care. For the first time in months, I was working for myself, not for the sake of appearances or family obligations. Just me and the boards, the paint covering years of wear, reclaiming what was still mine. When the paint dried, I went to the hardware store and bought petunias, marigolds, and 2 rose bushes. The cashier gave me a smile when I fumbled with the seed packets, and I realized it had been years since someone looked at me as a man making choices instead of an old father hanging on. I planted them by the front steps, knees aching, dirt under my nails, the sun setting warm on my back. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't victory, but it was mine. A few evenings later, I went to the community center for bingo night. I hadn't been in years. The place smelled of powdered sugar and old coffee, and the folding chairs squeaked under everyone's weight. I recognized some faces: Margaret, who used to bring over pies in the summer; Earl, who still bragged about catching a 30-pound catfish decades ago. They greeted me, tentative at first, then warmer as the numbers rolled. When the caller shouted B12 and I slapped my card, laughter spilled out of me. Real laughter, not the bitter kind I'd been nursing. It startled me. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear it. July rolled in with firecrackers and the smell of barbecue drifting down every street. My neighbor Rick waved me over for the 4th of July cookout. Kids ran through sprinklers, women passed around potato salad, and someone tuned the radio to country hits. I sat at a picnic table with a paper plate full of ribs, beans, and corn on the cob, listening to the chatter. No one looked at me as the old man who'd aired his family's sins. No one whispered about my children's greed. That day, I was just Arthur, the neighbor who showed up with a six-pack and a handshake. As fireworks bloomed over the park later that night, I tilted my head back and let the sparks reflect in my eyes. For years, I had lived as though my worth depended on being a provider, on being needed by children who only saw me as a wallet. But standing there in the glow of red, white, and blue, I felt something shift. I wasn't rich, I wasn't young, but my dignity was still intact, and I realized no one could take that unless I handed it over. I drove home, parked in the freshly painted driveway, and paused by the flowers in the front yard. Their colors glowed, even in the moonlight, stubborn and alive, just like me. From that day forward, I wasn't living for David, or Monica, or anyone else who thought they could strip me of worth. I was living for myself. And there was no price tag anyone could pin on that. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box to the right.